Live. Some Muriwai evacuees facing months of uncertainty are bringing in their own geotech experts. Anxious about rain, clingy or wanting to play disaster games. A warning about post-flood trauma in children. Farmers penned in by cyclone damaged roads and bridges are preparing a plan B to get stock out in time for winter. And Smee is back in the sea after almost a year of rehab and injured green turtles been returned to the wild. Don't forget you can watch us live on the RNZ website or Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Good evening, I'm Louise Pagonis. The Prime Minister is expecting to receive advice quite quickly about whether the chair of Pharmac and ACC, Steve Mahari, has breached impartiality rules, most likely tomorrow. The former Labour Minister has contacted Chris Hipkins' office to check if two of his columns critical of the National Party fall outside the Code of Conduct. National says Mr Mahari's in the same boat as Rob Campbell, sacked from Te Whatu Ora for comments posted on LinkedIn. But Mr Hipkins says it was a second strike for Mr Campbell and his response was very different.
He had indicated that he, did not resile from the comments that he made, continued to repeat them and actually continued to go further and indicated that it was his intention to continue to go further. Steve Mahari is certainly not in that category.
And Steve Mahari hasn't responded to RNZ's request for comment. A washout on State Highway 25 on the Coromandel Peninsula has got worse. Andrew McRae reports.
Heavy rain on Sunday night forced the closure of the road between Apoturi and Hikuwai until yesterday afternoon, when one lane was opened. That lane remains open, but Waka Kotahi warns the road may be closed at short notice and drivers can expect long delays. It says contractors are cutting into the bank to extend the road further away from where it's subsiding. The Transport Agency says the ground remains highly unstable and is being constantly monitored.
The country's largest insurer, IAG, has had more claims in 2 months than in all of last year. IAG Chief Executive Amanda Whiting says there are around 25,000 claims from the Auckland floods and so far 15,000 from Cyclone Gabrielle. A Napier resident says locals are disappointed the Police Eagle helicopter has left the area. It was deployed after reports of looting and opportunistic crime post-cyclone. 2,500 people signed a petition started by Jules Cunningham to keep Eagle in Hawke's Bay.
Not feeling happy that it's not here. There's already murmurings amongst social media that they really miss it. There's a few who are happy because they sleep better. But yeah, a lot of people that are feeling like they really don't want it to be gone. They want it to be here. It's the safest they've felt in a long time.
Severe weather watches are in place for most of the South Island from tonight. Heavy rain warnings are in force for Fiordland and Westland, and heavy rain watches for Buller, Nelson and the headquarters of the Canterbury Lakes and Rivers. A strong wind watch is in force for Fiordland and Western Southland. Pharmac is funding 2 new treatments for lung cancer. Keytruda will be funded as a first-line treatment and Tecentriq will be a later-line treatment to improve quality of life for people with advanced non-small cell lung cancer. Lucy Elwood from the Cancer Society says the immunotherapy treatments will massively improve lung cancer outcomes. A preliminary report into the deadly mid-air collision between 2 helicopters near SeaWorld on Australia's Gold Coast in early January says the pilot coming into land did not hear a call over the radio by the pilot taking off. But the Australian Transport Safety Bureau says that doesn't mean the taxi call was not made. Bureau Chief Commissioner Angus Mitchell says the report is only preliminary.
It only details the facts as we understand them from the first 2 months of this investigation. However, we are yet to analyse all the factors that potentially contributed to this tragedy.
4 people were killed and 6 seriously injured. An apprentice jockey has been suspended for 6 weeks after a panel ruled she rode carelessly in a race where fellow jockey Megan Taylor died. The 26-year-old died in a fall after horses collided in a December race. The case hinged on whether Denby Rose Tate had made a deliberate careless movement with her horse or whether her horse had reacted to contact from another rider. It's 4 minutes past 5. In sport, Hurricanes and All Blacks loose forward Ardie Savea will appear before a Super Rugby judiciary tonight for his throat-slitting gesture in his side's win over the Melbourne Rebels on Friday night. The Hurricanes captain was sin-binned for escalating a scuffle but continued to argue and make the gesture as he left the field. He was cited for foul play and breaching the spirit of the game and has pleaded not guilty. New national shot put champion Jack O'Gill is crediting his family for his latest success. The 28-year-old Gill ended Tom Walsh's 13-year reign as national champion at the weekend. Gill has struggled with injuries throughout his career and also overcame a life-threatening heart condition. However, with the help of his parents, who were both national throws champions, training has become a joy.
Just love it. To go out there and do something I love with the people I love is just everything. So, yeah, I guess it was hard mentally a few years back and had some heart issues, and it's been a really bumpy road, but just really enjoying it now. Just you can't get too sad when you're out there with your family.
The Breakers will play in front of a record home crowd for Sunday's fourth game of the Australian NBL Final Series. With 9,740 tickets sold to the game against the Sydney Kings, it breaks the previous highest attendant record at Spark Arena by nearly 500 people. The best-of-5 series is locked at 1-1 heading into Game 3 in Sydney on Friday. That's News and Sport.
Justifying a transport U-turn?
I don't see this as an either-or. It's not a question of whether we're mitigating climate change or whether we're adapting to it. We should actually be doing both.
Taking the high road?
It's a bit chaotic of the government. Yesterday morning they were talking about wanting to divert maintenance money for potholes to put it into cycleways, and by yesterday afternoon they weren't.
And shifting gears?
In the interim, there has been Cyclone Gabriel and also a change of leadership. So there was a fair amount of pretty hasty backpedalling.
There for every twist and turn. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Wednesday. In the east from Waitongo to Wellington, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow and a possible evening shower. The remainder of the North Island, fine apart from areas of morning cloud and valley fog. 1 or 2 showers possible about Mahia Peninsula and eastern Northland and Auckland today. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine. Isolated showers about the ranges from tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, fine today. Rain about the main divide tomorrow. Elsewhere, high cloud with a few spots of rain in the morning. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, a few showers turning to rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms developing south of the glaciers tonight and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Rain easing to isolated showers in Fiordland for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. Otago and Southland, cloudy, scattered rain developing this evening, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi, Louise. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Coromandel could be in a whole lot of trouble with another chunk of a key highway disappearing down a hillside. Right now, State Highway 25 between Whangamata and Hikuwai is open for essential travel only, and later today will close completely for a patch-up job. The bite out of the road is now almost touching the centre line, with earth beneath the remaining seal clearly dropping away and the highway down to 1 lane. Yesterday, maintenance workers had to cut into the bank to give some extra room on the shoulder of the road and allow for one-way traffic. The peninsula's other main access road, State Highway 25A, already has a massive canyon in it, and residents are nervous another lifeline road could go. Thames Coromandel Emergency Management Boss Gary Towler joins us now. Kia ora, Gary. This isn't pretty, is it?
It's pretty ugly, this one, Lisa, that's for sure.
So what is happening at the site at the moment?
So I've just got off the phone just a few seconds ago to the contractor Higgins, and what they've decided to do is they're going to work through until 6 p.m. tonight, and then they're going to close the road completely to ensure that it is stable and safe tomorrow when they're going to make another assessment as to what they're going to do with it. So it's still open to emergency services only and absolutely essential traffic, but they're going to close it to the main as a main thoroughfare, just to protect it, to make sure that they can get a good start on it early tomorrow morning.
Okay, so if you're closing it overnight, basically as a precautionary measure, is the assessment and the plan of what to do, that won't be decided until daylight hours?
That's correct. So what they're doing is they're just hoping that what they've done today and the remedial work they've managed to put in place will hold. And who knows? I mean, let's come back in the morning and see what has actually happened overnight as what happened last night. So it's just one of those things. But I can tell you right now, these contractors up there right now are absolutely hell-bent on keeping this open. You mentioned it's a lifeline. If this goes, we're in real trouble. So there's a great resolve by the contractors to win this battle. And fingers crossed they will.
Yeah, but yesterday it looked like a little tiny nibble, and today, Gary, it looks like a monster's come along and taken a great bite out of the road. How do you know it's just not going to keep sort of caving away and away and away until you lose the second lane?
That's dead right. That's what we won't know. But the contractors, what they have done is they've carved into the bank on the opposite side of the road and to allow traffic to actually stay away from that very vulnerable area. And hopefully that will maintain itself and not provide too much vibration, which will cause the rest of the road to go. It's going to be touch and go.
Have they indicated to you, Gary, what they can do? I mean, because it looks pretty precarious and it is literally undercutting the tar seal, right? So what actually can they do to stop it getting worse? Do they brace it? What are the options?
So they've got many options, and the obvious one, I think, to most of us as lay people, and I am speaking as a lay person here, is you sheet pile it. So you just put great big piles in, and you just sheet it up, and you backfill it, and you seal it, and away you go again. And that's what they do on a lot of roads around the country. Whether they decide to do that with this one, I'm not 100% sure, but we'll know in the morning. What the final decision is.
Okay, so they do the assessment in daylight hours and then they come up with a plan for it. Have they given you any indication realistically about how long it would take to patch that up?
No, and I don't think they actually know either yet. So they've done that remedial work. The geotech guys have been up. There's no doubt about that. They've been there for the day, so they've done their bit. But once again, we'll just have to wait for these guys. These are the experts. They know what they're doing, and it's not their first rodeo on the Coromandel this year, that's for sure.
No, they're getting plenty of practice at the moment. You mentioned the fact that this is a lifeline. I'm nervous about even saying this, Gary. What happens if it goes all together? What are your options?
We're in trouble. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we're fragile to the core anyway. This just means that the only road available for the supply chain onto the Coromandel will be via Thames, up to Coromandel, then across over to Matarangi and Whitianga. And that road in itself is quite fragile as well. So, yeah, it is...
fragile, how so?
About. Well, the thing is, there's continuous rockfall, debris fall, and the road is fragile, and all the banks and all the hillsides around it, as a result of this, just week after week of severe storms, has just made everything just so fragile. And we're getting debris coming down all the time, all over the place. So it's a tough time at the moment. We're just fingers crossed that we can hold this one together.
It's just going to get worse, isn't it, Gary? Because this is supposed to be autumn, right? You've got months and months of winter and more rain coming. You must be bracing for this to be happening, continuously. Or what is the master plan through winter?
The master plan through winter is fingers crossed. It is. I mean, we've had unprecedented weather. This is unheard of. We've had 2.3 odd metres of rain this year alone. We don't normally get that rain until October. So yeah, we are up against it. There's no doubt about that. But the reality is we've got the best available contractors. There's a steady resolve by the entire community of Coromandel Peninsula. To hang in there, because they are very resilient. And look, we just have to hope for the best and trust the engineers, and let's just hope that we can get a lot of good work done before winter.
Appreciate your time, Gary. That's Gary Towler, who's Thames Coromandel Emergency Management Boss there, saying that road will be closed at 6, so you've got about 45 minutes. At the moment, it's only supposed to be for essential travel, assessment in daylight hours tomorrow, and a plan, they hope. Some Muriwai residents are bringing in their own experts, saying they're sick of being stonewalled by the council. Last night, the council's geotech boss told Checkpoint some residents may have to wait 6 months or more to find out if they can go home. In the meantime, some are taking matters into their own hands and working towards finding their own solutions. Tom Taylor has this report.
Until recently, Abe Jew lived at the top of Motutara Road. Then, 3 weeks ago, the cyclone hit and a landslide destroyed his neighbour's property, trapping 2 local firefighters within it.
Right next to our property is the big first slit, and then the second slit is the one which was above the top shop. But our neighbour's house was completely destroyed, and quite a portion of our land was also torn off the side of the cliff.
Still, Mr. Jew considers himself lucky. After evacuating his home, he was quickly offered another place to stay in Muriwai. Keeping close to home means he's able to keep tabs on any new information, though he says the council's updates are few and far between. He's now pursuing a rental property, but with a minimum contract of 1 year, it's a tough financial commitment to make. Last week, Auckland Council confirmed it would not charge late fees for overdue rates from red-stickered homeowners. Mr. Jew says this money will be put to good use.
Cash flow is an issue right now. If you're suddenly having to find a bond for a $800 or $900 a week rental property, you're talking about $4,000 out of thin air.
But he's not waiting around for the council to tell him the fate of his home. Instead, he'll be meeting with a geotechnical engineer he hopes will be able to provide more answers.
We can't afford to sit on our hands and wait for answers to come from council. We may as well approach them and our insurance companies and say, listen, this is what we've discovered. What does this mean? You tell us.
Auckland Council's Head of Engineering Resilience, Ross Roberts, says for Muriwai residents closest to the cliff face, it may be more than 6 months before they know whether they'll be able to return to their homes. For those set further back, the wait may be less.
The ones further away from the slope, we're likely to be able to get a good idea within a month or two. The ones very close to the slope could well take longer than that. And it really does depend on how those slopes respond to changes over the next month or two.
At the bottom of the hill, Domain Crescent's become an exclusion zone, with geotechnical experts advising there's no safe access to the area. Jane Scott's home is in this zone, but as it's set further back from the cliff face, she's taking Mr. Roberts' guidance with cautious optimism.
I'm not close to the slip, so I might be okay with my house, fingers crossed. I'm certainly not ready to give up on our community. Some people are, but ready to give up on their community, but I'm definitely not ready to give up on my community. I want to go back.
But Ms. Scott says apart from this vague timeline, it's been hard to get any concrete information. Although the council's holding a drop-in meeting tomorrow, she doesn't see much point in travelling the 40 kilometres from her current lodgings in Browns Bay. She says last week's community meeting didn't give her much confidence.
My neighbour next to me was just sobbing all the way through the meeting. It was heartbreaking, that last meeting. He couldn't tell us anything and didn't even have any data in front of him that he could have. Where's your PowerPoint presentation?
Duncan Leach, on the other hand, says he will be attending tomorrow's meeting with an agenda of his own. His home's at the top of Motutara Road, and he says the entire area's been blanketed in red stickers, regardless of how close individual properties are to the slips.
Our place was white stickered, like most of the ones on our side of Motutara Road. Then they just came through and red stickered the whole street. Some houses are down driveways and up another hill. It would be impossible for the slip to hit their house. And they're still red stickered.
Mr. Leach has been staying in temporary accommodation while he waits for more information to come through. But he says this arrangement can't go on for the next 6 months or more, and tomorrow he'll be asking for solutions.
Imagine if we're your boss, right? And I go, right, you guys, in 2 weeks, I want to see some plans drawn up of 10 different scenarios, what you're going to plan for different situations, different ideas. Okay, I might put in some blast in there, we can put some containers here, other areas, not going to be so good, but I'll get some diggers and take that out, right? 2 weeks, come up with a plan.
Muriwai residents not content to wait around while time-consuming decisions are made on their behalf.
It is 18 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The trash talk has started, but there's no fight on the cards. National MP Mark Mitchell is disappointed Police Minister Stuart Nash won't go head-to-head with him in a charity boxing match. Mr Mitchell has challenged Mr Nash to join him in the ring at the Fight for Life event to raise money for mental health support in Hawke's Bay. But the Napier MP isn't biting, saying he's too busy to train and Mark Mitchell should be relieved. Our reporter, Annika Smith, has more.
Former National leader Bill English in the boxing ring in 2002, going up against entertainer Ted Clark in a Fight for Life contest and losing badly.
see the grimace on the face of Ted Clark, pummeling his friend.
Politicians have been a feature in fight nights over the years, and National MP Mark Mitchell is agitating for another one. He wants to go head-to-head with Police Minister Stuart Nash to raise money for mental health charity I Am Hope in Hawke's Bay.
There's no better time, in my view, right now is entering into a charity boxing match to fight for them, to make sure that an important charity like I Am Hope has got the ability to actually provide the services that they need.
The challenge has been laid, but Stuart Nash isn't interested. He's too busy and, according to him, constituents in his flood-stricken electorate don't want to see him fight.
I think if the people of the Napier electorate saw me in a gym training for a boxing match when they were out there struggling and wanting the help from their local MP and a Minister of the Crown, they wouldn't be terribly impressed.
It's no secret Stuart Nash spends a bit of time pumping iron in the gym, but he says it will take much more to get boxing fit.
I know what it takes to get fit to do 3 rounds in a boxing ring. I just haven't the time to get fit to give this justice. A great cause, and I will give a contribution, but not interested. Mitch should be happy about that.
Mark Mitchell isn't happy about it.
All he has to do is get up an hour earlier, do a bit more training, front up. He can use the whole time to actually highlight the plight of his own people down in the Hawke's Bay, support a really important charity that's actually down there now doing really hard work.
So, no Nash versus Mitchell fight on the cards, but both men are still talking up a big game on who would come out on top in a duel for charity.
Look, I've got to back myself, of course.
I'm scared of a few things. I'm not scared of Mark Mitchell.
The pair will have to remain opponents in Parliament, boxing across the House for the meantime.
It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As always, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program, homai or whakaaro. Let us know if you're on the Coromandel, what your concerns are about that road. Have you travelled on it today? 25. The bite out of it seems to be getting bigger. Serious concerns there. It's closing overnight. What's that going to mean for you? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. On a lighter note, who do you reckon would win if they got in the ring together? Mark Mitchell or Stuart Nash? Let us know your reckons on that one, 2101 on text. Let's go to the headlines now. Ane Louise, mina pitspitsa kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Thames Coromandel Emergency Management boss Gary Towler has told Checkpoint contractors are hell-bent on keeping a collapsing section of State Highway 25 open. The vital route between Whangamata and Hikuwai is open for essential travel only and will close at 6 p.m. for another assessment tomorrow morning. The bite out of the road is now almost touching the centre line. Mr Towler says it's a tough time after unprecedented weather. A person has died after a school bus crashed near Turakina, near Martin this afternoon. The driver died at the Makirikiri Road scene and 6 passengers suffered minor to moderate injuries. Police say the road will be closed for some time and the serious crash unit is investigating. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the use of consultants and contractors in the public sector should be sparing. During question time, National's Nicola Willis said $10 million had been spent on consultants working on the now-shelved income insurance scheme, while Treasury spent $8 million on consultants last year. An apprentice jockey, Denby Rose Tate, has been suspended for 6 weeks after a panel ruled today she rode carelessly in a race where fellow jockey Megan Taylor died. 26-year-old Ms Taylor fell after horses collided on the track at the Ashburton Raceway in December. And the Statistics Minister is confident of hitting a 90% completion rate for this year's census, but won't resign if it falls short. The 2018 census was plagued with problems and 1 in 7 people failed to fill out the form. So as traffic goes, expect a few closures across Auckland's motorway network tonight, including State Highway 1, Harbour Highway to Greville Road, northbound, and State Highway 1, Silverdale to Puhoi in both directions. If you see anything out there, let us know. It's 23 minutes past 5. I'll have updated news headlines and traffic for you around 5:40.
Kia ora rā, Eho. New Zealand football's pushback to a Saudi Arabian tourism body sponsoring the Women's Football World Cup has surprised the sports bigwigs. FIFA were reportedly caught off guard by criticism of Visit Saudi's involvement in the World Cup, which kicks off in Auckland in July. The governing body is trying to modify the deal before a FIFA Congress meeting next week, and we're joined now by our sports reporter Felicity Reid. What is the background to the sponsorship deal with Visit Saudi?
So the potential involvement of Visit Saudi in the Women's World Cup first came to light in January. This wouldn't be the first World Cup that Visit Saudi have been involved with. They were involved with the Men's World Cup, and you saw the logo quite visibly during that and during the Club World Cup in Morocco last month. But as soon as New Zealand Football and Football Australia sort of found out that that same visibility would be given to Visit Saudi at the tournament here, they wrote a joint letter to FIFA expressing some concern around, because obviously it's a human rights issue for these two organisations, and they've seen that as well with their communities, and a bit of a pushback within those communities as well around being involved in aligning especially a women's sports event with a country and promoting a country, as in Visit Saudi, promoting a country where women's rights, there's a questionable record there, and women still don't have equal rights with men in that country. So there's a lot around that which was of concern to New Zealand Football and Football Australia. There's also been a concern to players and former administrators. There's a petition that some big names in the game have signed, like USA's Alex Morgan and Megan Rapinoe. They've also reports out of Australia today that because of this letter that New Zealand Football and Football Australia have sent, it did sort of send shockwaves through FIFA, because they weren't really expecting the type of pushback, because they had used this before and maybe weren't expecting countries from this side of the world to be speaking up as much as they are. So reports out of Australia today are saying that it could be dropped, that Visit Saudi could be dropped from the tournament, but there is the potential that another Saudi organisation would take over that sponsorship deal. So, that possibly solves one part of the problem, but not all of it.
And this deal, well, it's not the only one that's raised eyebrows. What can you tell us?
Yeah, the appointment of Brazilian supermodel Adriana Lima as an ambassador for this tournament has raised some criticism from former players again in the game, and people who are maybe questioning why it's a model, not an athlete, that is actually the ambassador for this tournament. Former Australian Vice-Captain Moya Dodge, she called it tone deaf, and it's been called unnecessary by other groups as well. Again, because the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo was the sort of poster boy for the Men's World Cup, they're suggesting that something similar should have happened for the Women's Tournament as well. And they're not really short of options when it comes to that. There's like Australia's Sam Kerr, she plays in England as well, quite a well-known personality within the game, and as if they were wanting somebody quite close to home. Or equally, they've got the likes of the USA players who have are quite recognisable and have quite a platform of their own. So they could have been using different people in these roles.
Hey, just before you go, in your professional capacity as sports correspondent for Checkpoint, Stuart Nash versus Mark Mitchell, who do you reckon would win?
Oh dear. How many rounds have they got?
Well, I'm suggesting maybe they should just mud wrestle. It's better and avoids head injuries. Thank you very much, Felicity Reid, their sports reporter, sitting on the fence with that proposed boxing match. Now, a warning, children need specific disaster recovery services, and you can't just leave their wellbeing to chance. That from children's advocacy and aid group, UNICEF Australia. Thousands of young Australian children need intensive mental health support after catastrophic flooding in parts of New South Wales and Queensland in February and March of last year. 22 people died, and like here, the severity and speed of the weather event meant many people were caught with little time to evacuate, leading to rooftop rescues. Nicole Breeze from UNICEF Australia has been part of a joint project assessing the needs of children caught up in the floods.
What we know is that when emergency events happen, it's so important that children get the right support at the right time. Here in Australia, unfortunately, we've been experiencing a rolling set of events, from bushfires through to floods, back-ended by drought and COVID, of course. What can happen is children's needs can be overlooked. And what we know from our research and our work is that there are really significant impacts that kids are encountering.
Tell us about those. I mean, how does the distress manifest itself in young people?
What the research and experience shows is that with children, sometimes these impacts can stay hidden for quite a period of time. So the view will often be the kids are doing fine. They're robust, they're resilient. The adults around them are the ones sort of front-facing all of the stress, all of the issues, and all of the challenges. And an assumption can be made that kids are fine. And as I said, the research shows that sometimes the impacts stay hidden for a year, 2 years, or even longer. And we've recently, 5 months after the floods on the southeast coast of Australia, our teams conducted a needs assessment, and it was really telling in terms of what some of these key challenges are.
Yeah, so you interviewed educators and teachers, and what did they say they were seeing in the children?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note, it's really important that every child, every family and every community is different. So the needs are unique. But you're right, across 20 communities affected by these events, we did interview these key informants, and we can cluster our findings into about 6 key groups to help understand how kids are affected in these situations. So these range from the most obvious impacts, like disruption to education in situations where schools are closed for prolonged periods of time. What the educators and the informants were also reporting was increased absenteeism by kids. And this is 5 months after the event that we conducted this study. So as families were still in a state of flux, there were really significant reports of absenteeism by children in all cohorts. So one group of impacts is under that education piece, but there's impacts that also continue through to the impact of children losing their recreation and play spaces. Also, the physical environment, in our case, kids being exposed to mould and other sorts of natural hazards to health. But probably the most significant cluster of impacts that our study revealed is to children's health and mental health and well-being.
Yeah, and in terms of mental health and well-being, I read that absences go up when it rains, and that there are signs of distress in the kids.
Yeah. That's correct, yeah. So I think it's really the anxiety levels that peak, and that's what our interviewees were really telling us, a clear pattern of heightened anxiety evidenced amongst children 5 months after these events. As you say, when it rains, children really exhibiting high signs of anxiety. And we heard the same actually post the bushfires here in Australia as well. When a fire truck passed a school area, heightened anxiety. But also under this category, children exhibiting signs of grief and loss. These are children, some of whom have lost their family home, but also children hold really strong relationships to their animals, and many of whom lost pets. They lost their favourite toys and their belongings in these events. So children still sitting with that, as well as preschool educators describing to us some regression in skills in the 2 to 4 year old group. So, for example, children who had previously been able to use the toilet without a parent's assistance were showing some signs of regression in previously acquired skills. And for older children aged 5 to 12, lots of reports, sadly, of sleep disturbances, nightmares, and other signs of stress. So really, really significant impacts for children reported through our study.
So when we look at our situation here in New Zealand, it's not dissimilar to the situation that you experienced with the floods. So what would you say to people, organisations, we have a Cyclone Relief Committee, when they're considering what they should be doing for communities and talking about infrastructure and rebuilding, what should they be thinking about the children?
The most critical thing that I would say is we need to think about children and their unique and distinct needs. Sometimes we make the mistake to think that children are just the same as small adults, and that when we plan policy, when we plan investment, if we plan for adults, this will work for children. But we know that that's not the case. And here in Australia, nobody does this intentionally, but sometimes children's needs are overlooked. So what we're saying to our own authorities, and it may be relevant across there, is that we actually need child-sensitive disaster preparedness, response and recovery plans. We can't leave this to chance. We need to make sure that our systems get stronger and that children's needs are dealt with from day one in terms of the analysis and the response.
And that was Nicole Breeze from UNICEF Australia, and they were part of that project to assess the needs of children caught up in the floods last year. It is 27 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa I nei ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins us in the studio live. Turners, this is the car sales company, right? And they are on track to make a record profit. What's the reason? Is it connected to the cyclone?
No.
Okay.
It's actually the numbers that they accumulated in the last, few months ending in February. They've updated their outlook because their market share increased in the last quarter of last year. They said that even though national car sales were down 9% year on year, their market share increased. They were really pleased with the business that they're getting through. But they said that their arrears, like they also lend money on cars and so on, that's fell into arrears over December, January. So I guess people were spending money on other things and not paying their car loan, possibly.
But cheese and food and everything else got more expensive.
Yeah,
Maybe
I guess
that's
so.
Part of it.
Well, that would have been a lot of it, I'm sure. And that improved in February. However, they're still seeing weakness out there, so that they're expecting people are going to, feel pressure to make those payments. Yeah.
Okay, and this computer chip company, Raycon, it's lifted its profit outlook. What's it say?
Yeah, there's a company that we've talked about back in the day, wasn't doing so well with their chips. They make little chips for computer equipment and so on, like GPS, that kind of stuff. The space industry too. Yep. Yeah, very good. Anyway, look, there was a shortage of computer chips last year, you might have recalled, and the company was benefiting from that, but they say that they have momentum behind their business. Right. And so they increased their underlying profit by a couple $1 million at the sort of low end. So now between 40 and 44 million versus 38 and 44 million. Okay. Anyway, never mind, the market like that. Their share price finished up 1.1%, and the Turner's share price 4.25%. That's pretty good on a day when the top 50 index rose just 7 points to 11,920. The New Zealand dollar was interesting this afternoon after the Reserve Bank of Australia lifted its their equivalent of the official cash rate by a quarter of a basis points to 3.6%. That was their 10th increase in a row. So we were at 62.1 US cents, and that's, basically where we started out. But 92.5 cents Australian, which is an improvement, and steady at 51.5 pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with business news. A second stoush has blown up around a government-appointed chair and claims of political impartiality. Last week it was health boss Rob Campbell. Now it's the chair of Pharmac, Steve Mahari, a former Labour MP and Cabinet Minister. Nationals calling for him to go after columns penned by Mr Mahari took aim at the opposition and National leader Christopher Luxon. But the government is denying any double standards, saying their former colleague has been contrite, unlike the outspoken Rob Campbell. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The Health Minister, Aisha Verrill, fronting to media this morning for the first time since she sacked Rob Campbell as Chair of Health NZ.
Look, I think Rob Campbell has been vocal enough on this issue for the most of us.
Indeed, he has been vocal. Mr Campbell's gone down in a blaze of glory, labelling his punishment an overreaction, a witch hunt, and the utmost hypocrisy. His crime was to speak his mind on National's Three Waters policy, a breach of the requirement he stay politically neutral.
He called the leader of the opposition stupid, and he implied his policies were racist. And while he apologised to me, he then doubled down on those criticisms in the press.
And that's not all. On his way out the door, Rob Campbell's lobbed another grenade, another mess for the minister to deal with. Late last week, he accused the government of double standards, pointing out another chair had made similarly political comments before, to no reaction. The chair of Pharmac, Steve Mahari.
I want to say that the situation I faced with Mr Campbell is very different from the one with Mr Mahari.
Mr Mahari is a former Labour Party minister and not one afraid to show his colours from time to time in a regular column on Stuff. In January, he wrote, "National is more interested in the past than the future," and compared it to the US Republicans. In October last year, he wrote, "National is not a party of change," and Christopher Luxon's brand rests on his management of an airline.
Either you're a political commentator or a pundit, or you're doing a very serious job as a chair of a Crown entity. You can't have it both ways.
The opposition wants Steve Mahari gone too. National's Simeon Brown says the political operator has no excuse. He should know the rules.
He has done exactly the same as what Rob Campbell has done, and we need to have high standards and those rules need to be followed.
But the government says the offence is not exactly the same. While Rob Campbell doubled down, Steve Mahari has been the picture of contrition. He rang the Prime Minister to apologise, he's dropped his column, and he has offered his resignation. The Minister Viral is now waiting on advice from the Public Service Commission before deciding whether to accept it. But Chris Hipkins says he does not expect perfection.
I would not ask for his resignation in these circumstances. He's made a mistake, he's apologised for it, and he's indicated he's not going to do it again.
So this is a protection racket rather than actual accountability.
Steve Mahari should know his fate by tomorrow. He's not returned RNZ's requests for an interview today. A different approach from Rob Campbell, holding his tongue to hold on to his job.
It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Some of you getting in touch about the Coromandel roads. This from a listener. The road situation in Coromandel is a nightmare. I'm due to go into labour any day now, and the access to our nearest birth centre and hospital is compromised. The midwives working in the area do amazing work to take care of us, but it's really stressful situation for them and us to navigate. Sounds incredibly stressful. Do the road closures affect you? Are you on the Coromandel? What are your concerns? 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, and we'll get to more of them shortly. It is, though, time to go to the headlines. Ko Louise anō tēnei.
Police say the driver of a school bus that crashed at Turakina near Martin this afternoon died at the scene. St John Ambulance was called to the site at Makirikiri Road just before 3 o'clock. 6 passengers had minor to moderate injuries. The road is closed and the serious crash unit is investigating. Thames Coromandel Emergency Management boss Gary Towler says State Highway 25A between Whangamata and Hikawai will be closed tonight as a chunk of road that washed out has got bigger. He said the contractor is closing the road at 6 p.m. to all but emergency services. Another assessment will take place tomorrow. A bill which would have allowed an equal number of Māori and general seats in the Rotorua Lakes District Council has been scrapped. The Attorney General had found the bill to be discriminatory and a breach of the Bill of Rights. This afternoon it was announced in the House that the bill had been withdrawn entirely. Operations are being postponed at Dunedin Hospital because of staff shortages and a busy emergency department. The hospital has tonight put out a message warning about how busy it is amid a large number of ED visitors, staff illness and vacancies. It says emergency department will not turn anyone away. And abroad, Afghan universities have reopened after a winter break, with Taliban rulers barring female students from returning. The ban is one of several restrictions imposed on women since the Islamist group seized power in 2021. The UN calls these policies gender-based apartheid. And traffic, plan ahead for a closure on Cobham Drive at the Troy Street roundabout tonight, 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. for resurfacing works. There's a detour in place. Those are the headlines. Our next news update is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Louise. The clock is ticking for farmers who need to get stock off their land ahead of winter, but can't because cyclone damage has them penned in. Some small rural communities are still completely cut off, waiting for road repairs or bridge replacements that could be months away. Risington in Hawke's Bay is in the queue for a Bailey Bridge, and that means farmers in the area are looking for a workaround in the meantime. Well, joining us now is sheep and beef farmer Patrick Crawshaw. Hi, Patrick. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Kia ora, no worries.
Tell us about access to your farm. What access do you have?
At the moment, we're sort of working on a bit of a causeway, a culverted solution over the Mangoni River, but that's restricted to light vehicles only, in largely just residents and essential personnel. And so if we need any bulk things, like we've got a 50-tonne generator powering the district from a power point of view, the bulk fuel is coming across the Tutokuri River, which requires it being put on a tractor trailer and the tractor pulling it, and then a dozer pulling the tractor thereafter. So it's quite an exercise, obviously, to do anything on a bulk scale, which obviously a lot of these businesses depend on.
So you basically got a moat around you. Would that be fair?
Yeah, definitely. We call ourselves on our own little island at the best of times, sort of thing. But it is. We're isolated from the rivers, basically.
Can you explain to me and the rest of the townies why you need to get the cattle off the farm?
Yeah, so basically as we've turned the calendar over into March, and that's the start of autumn, but ultimately we've been in this predicament for sort of 3 weeks, and given the feed levels going into, prior to Cyclone Gabrielle, we probably had a bit of confidence around what our systems on farm were looking like, and had a fair bit of surplus feed that we could be opportunistic on and take a few more mouths through, do a little bit longer, get a better carcass weight, or get a better sale price off the back of it. And then when Cyclone Gabrielle hit and took out all our access points to be able to offload those stock into the meat processor or off to other farms into a finishing arrangement or that sort of thing. There's a lot of carrying capacity still standing on farm, which is eating a lot of feed. That's now quite valuable feed and precious as we prepare for having enough feed on farm,
right,
or inventory on farm to
so you thought
those numbers.
You thought you had enough food on deck to feed all the animals, and you could have them on the farm for a little bit longer. Then this thing, Cyclone Gabrielle, hit, and now you're cut off and can't get the excess cows, sheep, whatever, out to market.
Yeah, dead right. Yeah, and so just to put a bit of perspective to it, there's just under 3,000 lambs between 10 properties further up country that were all meant to be off farm by mid-February they're obviously still hanging on farm, and then they've got their brothers still sitting in behind them.
So Patrick, what do you do? Do you walk them across the river when it's possible? Or, I mean, how do you actually get them off? What's plan B?
Yeah, so we've almost got plan B in place. We've got a few more moving parts yet to come to fruition, but it was looking like we were going to try and swim cattle out, but the flow going through the Mangatutu River and the Tutakuri is too much for cattle to be entering, and so we've had to find another solution, which involves a tractor and trailer unit pulling a stock crate over the river and then ferrying them over and driving them up to a yard.
Wow, that sounds complicated and potentially expensive. Yeah,
I mean, it's we're quite creative, and so we've been able to piece these things together with the generosity of the wider community. But there's a lot of moving parts to it. Obviously, that's potentially 3 more handling processes additional to the normal sort of process. And also, so it requires a lot more manpower and a lot more logistical coordination to bring it all together.
Good luck, Patrick. Really appreciate you taking some time out to talk to us. That is Patrick Crawshaw, who's a sheep and beef farmer. And as he said, there's a bunch of them while looking for ways to get their animals off the property before they run out of feed and heading into the cooler winter months too. The Mayor of Gisborne has welcomed the government decision to focus its transport priorities to repair roads in cyclone-hit areas. In its 3-year plan, the government had wanted to reallocate some of the money normally spent on road maintenance for bus and bike lanes. But emissions reduction is no longer the top priority, which has outraged those wanting action on climate change. Jamie Tahana reports from Gisborne.
The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, insists it's not a case of either or. Rather, he says it's about creating an infrastructure network that can adapt to climate change. Here in Gisborne, which is cut off from all but one direction, that's welcome news for Mayor Rahette Stoltz.
I would be comfortable that the government would balance their responsibility to reconnect our communities and also communities in the Coromandel, the Hawke's Bay and Auckland with their climate change responsibilities.
Taira Whiti is cut off from Hawke's Bay, with State Highway 2 destroyed in several places. With hillsides collapsed and bridges gone, it's likely to remain impassable for months. Graham Lowes, a manager from Farmers Transport, says that's devastating.
For us to get stock to the market from Gisborne to, say, the Hawke's Bay was once a 250-kilometre trip involving about 4 hours. Now it's a 700-kilometre trip involving 11 hours.
But even before the cyclone, locals round here say the roads were dire. State Highway 35 up the coast, now dealing with devastation, has had little maintenance for years. The Waiawika Gorge to the Bay of Plenty is narrow, winding and often closed by slips. It's a similar case with the highway down to Hawke's Bay. Rahet Stoltz says serious investment is needed.
We have a massive infrastructure need which comes with a massive price tag. So the government reprioritising money for infrastructure for our region is a top priority for us. So we welcome investment into our region. We will need millions and millions of dollars.
But the praise round here isn't universal. Manu Kedi is in Ruatoria, on the north end of the severed State Highway 35. He says the decision is understandable but disappointing. Emissions reduction is critical, he says. After all, cyclones like Gabrielle are only going to be more common.
This region is some of the most erosion-prone land in the world, and shifting a road is not going to take away the problem of hillside slipping, and that's going to continue and accelerate under climate change scenarios. So we do need to make those changes to reduce emissions.
The government insists that can still be done.
Jamie Tahana reporting there. It is 11 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Smee is back in the sea. A green turtle that spent almost a year in rehab after being accidentally hooked on a fishing line has been returned to the wild. The turtle, named after Captain Hook's best buddy, was patched up at Auckland Zoo and then looked after by Kelly Tarleton's for months after being rescued in the Bay of Plenty. Kelly Tarleton's lead turtle rehabilitator, Tyler Hall, joins us now. Kia ora, Tyler. How was it saying goodbye to Smee?
It was a bit bittersweet, you know. It's always, you always build like a nice relationship with these turtles, and then you get so close to them, and it is hard to let them go, but it always feels pretty good knowing that you've done the right thing.
Why did it take so long to patch up Smee?
Well, obviously it was quite a sort of intricate operation that it went through, so there was quite a long time of rehabilitation that it needed, just with it was struggling to eat initially. The medication that it was on had quite a long time frame, and then we also try and release turtles close to the summertime. Obviously the summer that we have just had, it hasn't been that great, so we've only just sort of had a good spout of nice weather. But yeah, obviously we've been in the winter time, so it's better for them to be released when it's a bit warmer.
So Smee had hooks in the belly?
It was actually just sort of in the bottom of his throat. So what had happened was that a fisherman had pulled him up and then contacted Doc. Doc then got in contact with the Auckland Zoo vet, and he took the trip down there. And the team at the Auckland Zoo vets basically performed an operation where they opened up his neck and then pulled the first hook out, and then to their surprise found a second hook.
Oh, that sounds awful. I mean, you're the lead turtle rehabilitator, which seems to suggest you get quite a few turtles to rehabilitate. What's happening to them?
Well, most of the time when we have a turtle washing up somewhere, the common cause is that they've got some sort of illness, whether it be a bacterial infection or a fungal infection or something. It can also be like weather events throw them off course a little bit, and then they end up coming onto our shores just in the confusion. And also, you know, with Smee, that's just the case of it was a hungry turtle that saw an opportunity in a, wrong time, wrong place.
Tell us something about green turtles that we wouldn't know.
Oh, well, actually, green turtles, most people wouldn't know that it's quite hard to identify their genders. So a lot of the time for us, we don't even know if our turtles are a girl or a boy or anything like that. So the only way that we can really tell is by doing some DNA tests, and then we have to check their cloaca, which is sort of their reproductive organ that they have, and that's really the only way to do it. So most of the time we'll be giving them boy names, giving them girl names, but, it could be anything.
And you've got more to release, I understand. Is that right, turtles?
Yeah. So at the moment, we've got 3 other turtles in our care. They're all green sea turtles, but we're going to try and release them over the next few weeks or in the coming months. Just as long as they're in good health and good shape and everything goes to plan, then they should be setting off to some warmer waters.
So those 3, what happened to them?
Well, most of the time, these ones have just been beach washers, as we call them. So they've come up onto the beach, someone's found them either flipped over on their back or, a bit dehydrated or emaciated on the beach. And, that's most of the time. One of them had quite a bad fungal infection in its lung. So we gave it antibiotics and things like that, and it's finally come right. But some of them have buoyancy issues where they just can't quite sink properly as they need to, and then they can't feed and become pretty weak. But these ones are all in pretty good health at the moment.
That's fantastic news. Thank you for joining us, Tyler, and fantastic to hear that Smee, is free again, released back into the ocean after almost a year of rehab. After the country's devastating floods, sponge cities are being floated as a solution to future downpours. The term sponge city is all about uncovering natural streams and using native plants to absorb water, and there's an example of it in central Auckland. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went to check it out.
This Freeman's Bay house looks like a regular property, but Mark van Karthoven and Jean Dillman's home of 30 years is more like an urban jungle, teeming with native birds, exotic plants and bees. Growing up, Mark's father was a landscaper, so it was a natural career path for him.
I've learned to actually work more with nature than control it.
3 years ago, when Auckland went through a drought, they had to rethink how they used their water to keep the garden flourishing.
I'm thinking, well, I don't have tanks, so okay, I'll use my recycle bin, and I disconnected one pipe and put it into the recycle bin, and once that was full, I thought, well, I need another bin, so I just continued getting more bins, and then I continued disconnecting the downpipes, and then I talked to my plumber about getting a pump system where I can actually use that pump system on my hose and water the garden with the water I had in the tank. We put it into a bucket like this and it goes onto the garden. If not in the garden, it goes into the toilet.
Once his 8 wheelie bin tanks are full, he redirects the pipes into his mulching system, which acts as a sponge. They were overseas the night of the Auckland anniversary floods, when torrents of water came gushing down Freeman's Bay Road and flooding nearby properties. Mark says their setup left them unscathed.
We had people come through on that night when it was pouring with rain, and they said, no, everything's dry in your house. But everyone around us was dealing with massive amounts of water coming either into their living quarters or their garages or almost coming into their properties, and we had none of that. Our garden saved us.
The couple uses water from the kitchen sink on their garden and from their bath and showers to flush their toilet.
Our water bill for July last year was $14.
The garden also has a backup drainage system if there are any overflows. Mark's also worked on the nearby Freeman's Bay Park. A few years ago, the area was prone to flooding, but thanks to his planting, it's remained intact. He's been asked to do the exact same at nearby Western Park, which was flooded. Some suburbs like Hobsonville Point are already adopting the spongy concept, with green spaces like this one absorbing the water. And each new house here has to have its own catch basin to collect rainwater to prevent that water from running down the road. Senior lecturer in architecture and director of urban planning at the University of Auckland, Tim Welsh, says the area had some of the most intense rainfall, but this drainage reserve kept properties dry. He says New Zealand is behind other parts of the world. About 200 cities have already used the sponge idea. On a larger scale, it involves throwing out the old building rules.
We're looking at huge floodable parks, preserving wetlands, and even potentially moving back from our sensitive environments that we've developed on previously.
Tim says we need to preserve our green spaces.
Instead of growing endlessly outward into that kind of natural environment, we can intensify in meaningful places that have already been developed, and allow that green space to continue to act like the sponge.
Stonefields is another example of a sponge suburb where wetlands have been preserved with floodable parks soaking up water. But for places built on wetlands or floodplains, he says we may need to retreat away from those areas. While it may not be the whole answer, it's part of the solution.
It's not going to save every house, for sure. We can't predict how intense the rainfall will be, but we can certainly slow it down and reduce the amount of flooding. And a single life, saved from reducing flooding is worth it, in my opinion.
Pretty amazing pictures there and an absolutely outstanding garden. Do check out the video, which was filmed by Marika Habazi. We'll put it up on our web page. Just a reminder, State Highway 25 is closing overnight between Hikawai and Opotiri. That happens in about, a minute and a half. 6 o'clock, they say they're closing it. Contractors will keep building the access track around the underslip this evening. Site's going to be inspected again tomorrow morning to reassess whether it's safe to reopen. The picture looks pretty grim. Quite a big chunk out of the road, and it is concerning locals. This from Viv in Tairua, who says, I went to Hikawai from Tairua an hour ago to fuel up just in case the Whangamata Hikawai road closes indefinitely. They say only essential travel is allowed over it at the moment. Lots of traffic coming through though, smallish truck, several camper vans. I have a rescheduled hospital appointment in Auckland on Thursday. I missed my last appointment because of road closures. So I'm heading to Auckland tomorrow just to make sure I get there and have 24 hours to do so, as I may have to go from Tairua via Coromandel town to Auckland if the Whangamata road gets closed again tomorrow. It is like living on an island with no ferry, says Viv. Someone else says, should visitors stay away from the Coromandel? Should we be avoiding planning holidays or travel to Coromandel town over the next few months to lessen pressure on the few roads that are open? And this person says, not just talking about 25 and 25A. Yeah, that is the conundrum. Someone else says the people of Coromandel will have to leave. I don't know if it's that simple. And others are calling for a revival of the coastal shipping for stores and access to the Coromandel. The vulnerabilities of its key roads have well and truly shown that it could be good.
RNZ News at 6, call Louise Pagonis Tierney. A Rangatike school is confirming all of its pupils are safe after one of its school buses crashed this afternoon, killing the driver. Emergency services were called to the site at Makirikiri Road at Turakina near Martin just before 3 o'clock this afternoon. Police say the driver of the bus died at the scene. Ambulance staff treated 6 passengers with minor to moderate injuries, but no one was taken to hospital. The principal of Martin South Makariki School, Greg Allen, says all of his students are safe with their parents. Operations are being postponed at Dunedin Hospital because of staff shortages and a busy emergency department. The hospital has tonight put out a message warning about how busy it is and apologising to patients who have to wait for care. It says there are large numbers of people coming to the ED, as well as staff illness and vacancies. It says its emergency department will not turn anyone away seeking medical help. The Thames Coromandel Civil Defence says the region's main highway is currently fragile to the core. A major slip eating into State Highway 25 between Whangamata and Hikawai has reduced traffic to emergency services only and will be closed completely this evening as workers dig into a bank to extend the road away from the drop. Thames Coromandel Civil Defence Controller Gary Towler says if its main highway keeps succumbing to the weather, the region will be in big trouble.
The only road available for the supply chain onto the Coromandel will be via Thames, up to Coromandel, then across over to Matarangi and Whitianga. And that road in itself is quite fragile as well.
Gary Towler says contractors will be closing the road overnight and reassessing its state tomorrow morning before a plan is made. 2 major roads into northern Hawke's Bay have reopened in the last 24 hours as efforts are made to reconnect the battered region. Waka Kotahi says 2 key routes into Wairoa have reopened after being assessed by geotechs, with State Highway 2 from Ropanga opening this morning. State Highway 38 between Wairoa and Frasertown also opened yesterday for the first time since Cyclone Gabrielle. A locked gate will be installed at the top of the Mohaka Hill on State Highway 2 to prevent people accessing Waikari Gorge. Gisborne's mayor says a change in government transport priorities to rebuild cyclone-damaged infrastructure is welcome news. The government has been criticised for no longer having emissions reduction as its top transport priority. But in Gisborne, which is cut off in all but one direction, Mayor Orihet Stoltz says the network has suffered from years of underinvestment.
We have a massive infrastructure need, which comes with a massive price tag. So the government reprioritising money for infrastructure for our region is a top priority for us. So we welcome investment into our region. We will need millions and millions of dollars.
Rihet Stoltz says she's sure emission targets can still be met with the change. A resident of Ruatoria says many in the town are now recovering in the wake of Cyclone Gabrielle, but some are just surviving. Manu Caddy says the road north of the town is open, but a once 3-hour round trip to Gisborne is now 15 hours. He says that makes life more difficult, but locals are finding ways to cope.
We've got a number of communities that are still in households with limited access. Some have to use horses or quad bikes to get in and out where there was a road prior. So that's quite challenging for people just to get to the shops, let alone to get medical treatment and emergency and things. So we have helicopters flying around all the time still that are ferrying sick people around.
The situation for an estimated 58,000 children remains extremely precarious after twin cyclones tore through Vanuatu. UNICEF says children in the worst affected provinces of Tawhia and Shefa in particular need urgent help to recover. Many have lost their homes, schools, neighbourhoods and all things familiar in their lives. An apprentice jockey has been suspended for 6 weeks after a panel ruled she rode carelessly in a race where fellow jockey Megan Taylor died. The 26-year-old died in a fall after horses collided in a December race. Anna Sargent reports.
The Racing Integrity Board charged apprentice jockey Denby Rose Tate with careless riding in January after the fatal race at Canterbury's Ashburton Raceway. Denby Rose Tate appeared before an adjudicative committee today, as well as witnesses which included another jockey who was in the race. The case hinged on whether Ms Tate had made a deliberate careless movement with her horse on the track, or if her horse had reacted to contact from another rider. The committee found the charge to be proven, and Denby Rose Tate's 6-week suspension will begin on Friday.
Officials in the US state of Georgia have charged 23 people with domestic terrorism offences. Police in Atlanta say the suspects were part of a coordinated group who attacked officers on Monday. They were protesting against a new police training centre which they say will degrade police relations with minority communities and damage the environment. And the Japanese Space Agency says the launch of its new rocket has failed after the second stage engine didn't ignite. The BBC's Shema Kail is in Tokyo.
Japan's new flagship H3 rocket was ordered to self-destruct minutes after it lifted off for the first time. It was carrying a disaster management land observation satellite that was equipped with an experimental infrared sensor designed to detect North Korean ballistic missile launches. This is a blow to the country's efforts to expand its access to space and remain competitive. The H3 has been designed to lift government and commercial satellites into Earth's orbit and to take supplies to the International Space Station.
And that's the news.
I'm Mihingarangi Forbes, and I'll be discussing all the big issues this election year with Māori commentators, newsmakers, and even the odd politician on RNZ's new podcast, Mata.
They will say that the next election will be based on the economy.
So join me for Mata with Mihingarangi Forbes after the 6:30 headlines this evening on RNZ National.
And back to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen shortly, but first the updated short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Wednesday. In the west from Waitomo to Wellington, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow and a possible evening shower. The remainder of the North Island, fine apart from areas of morning cloud and valley fog. 1 or 2 showers possible about Mahia Peninsula and eastern Northland and Auckland today. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, isolated showers about the ranges from tomorrow afternoon. afternoon. Canterbury, mainly fine, but a few spots of rain about the high country. Rain about the main divide tomorrow, with a few spots spreading elsewhere. Bulla, Western and Fiordland, a few showers turning to rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms developing south of the glaciers tonight and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Rain easing to isolated showers in Fiordland for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. Otago and Southland, cloudy, scattered rain, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6. I'll have the headlines for you at 6:30. Back to Lisa Owen and Checkpoint.
Nā mihi eho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Wellington Water's plea to the City Council for an extra $10 million to fix the broken water network has been turned down. The Council has voted to allocate just $2.3 million of the money the water management company says it needs. Residents are fed up with dodging gushing water and want Council to let Wellington Water get the job done. Lauren Crimp has the story.
This is a familiar sound in the capital. I'm on Aro Street, which has had its fair share of leaky pipes. Wellington Water says it needs extra cash to fix them, and locals want the council to cough up.
It's ridiculous. There's just so many leaky pipes, and you walk up the street every day, there's leaky pipes. Fix them.
They're not entirely responsible for the current situation. It's about 5 decades of neglect they've got to deal with, but they probably just have to cough up and pay the money that's required to do it.
I think it's a really bad idea to not pour the money into fixing up the water. It's going to get more and more expensive every year.
I guess at least it's something, but it's not really going to cut it, I think. You're just putting a Band-Aid over it.
Maybe there's a reluctance to give out all of that money at once. Perhaps there needs to be more scrutiny of Wellington Water's systems and how they implement them.
Mayor Tory Whānau has partially attributed the city's upcoming 12.3% rates hike to an historic underinvestment in the water network. But in the draft annual plan, council staff recommended against dishing out the full $10 million because Wellington Water already had 2 funding boosts last year, totalling $7 million. That's on top of $1.2 billion dedicated to water infrastructure in the long-term plan. Councillor Rebecca Matthews chairs the Long-Term Plan, Finance and Performance Committee and says water is Council's top priority, but it didn't think Wellington Water could achieve the work.
We still have some questions to ask them, which haven't been answered really, about the capacity to deliver the work for the extra $10 million. We've so far allocated what we have confidence can be delivered in the next year, and we'll continue to work with Wellington Water, and we have topped them up as we see the cases made for the extra work and have confidence that it can be delivered.
But in a statement, Wellington Water's acting chief executive, Tonya Haskell, says when it provided advice for the annual plan, it made sure it could deliver on the outcomes. She says it's up to councils to consider the advice and decide what they invest. And Wellington Water will adjust its work based on available funding. Councillor Nicola Young says the council should give Wellington Water what it's asked for and trust it to deliver.
Everyone talks about fixing the pipes. Here was an opportunity to give them the money to fix the pipes. And then we decided, with no technical expertise, they couldn't do the work.
Nicola Young says she and other councillors suggested ways to cut back on less important spending to bump Wellington Water's coffers, but that was voted against. The public can have their say on the draft annual plan in April before it's debated and adopted by Council in June.
Lauren Crimp reporting there. In the blue corner is National MP Mark Mitchell. In the red corner, no one. An empty stall. After Police Minister Stuart Nash said no thanks to smashing it out in the Fight for Life charity boxing event to raise money for mental health support in Hawke's Bay. The Napier MP isn't biting, saying he's too busy to train for a boxing match and Mark Mitchell should be relieved. Well, joining us now is National MP Mark Mitchell. Phew, Mark, you've been saved.
Lisa, you've got to ring him. You've got to ring him and put the pressure on him and say it's not too late. Yeah, look, I was approached by Dean Lonergan along with Stu about 2 weeks ago and said, would you come and support the Fight for Life, raising money for I Am Hope, Mike King's organisation. I said it's an absolute no-brainer, count me in. But Nashi has dealed himself out.
Hey, speaking of no-brainers, in the interest of non-contact sparring, I need to read you some of the things that people have been texting in and get your response, Mark.
Yep.
Roy says, from a mental health professional, a boxing match for mental health, someone doesn't understand how mental health issues arise. And this one, Mark Mitchell sounds like he's already had too many hits to the head. Does it have to be boxing, Mark?
That's nonsense, absolute nonsense. So some of the best things that have turned young people around, especially young men around that have been suffering from mental health or depression, are some of these very good boxing gyms around the country, including the one that I've been going to up in my own patch with these young guys that were going off the rails, and they're in a very, very positive environment where they're getting lots of good exercise, which is actually good for your mental health. And these days, when you're boxing with headgear on and 16-inch gloves, the risks are reduced massively.
Oh, is that why you want to fight him? You've already been training. You think you've got the upper hand. You started early.
No, listen, I've started doing a bit of training, but no, I've been aware of the gyms in my patch for a long time, and they're all over the country. But I am disappointed because I was down in Hawke's Bay last week. Mike King happened to be there at the same time. He just raised $90,000 and opened up a drop-in centre for the people down there who, of course, were still operating on adrenaline sort of 5 or 6 days ago, but are coming off that really quickly. And, anxiety, depression and stress is going to be a major issue for them down there. This excuse from Stu that he hasn't got time to train, what a load of nonsense. You just get out of bed an hour early and do some training. It's one evening. I did the Sky Tower Challenge for our firefighters. It's quite simply, I did all my work, but I just got up a bit earlier to do the training.
The thing is, though, he's a minister, right? No disrespect. He's a minister, you're an MP in opposition. And he's also the Cyclone recovery, representative for the Hawke's Bay. So he's got a lot on his plate. And the thing is, I'm just wondering, why does it have to be boxing? You could get sponsorship. What's wrong? Someone has suggested, hang on, Tai Hoa, yep. Someone suggested a chess game. What's wrong with that?
A chess game? Listen, I love chess.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you could still raise money. Or what about Connect 4? I think the counters in that are red and blue, aren't they?
I used to play chess here in Parliament with Vernon Small all the time. I don't know if you know this, but he's actually a grandmaster chess player. He's very, very good. Look, the reason for the boxing is quite simply this. That's the event that they're holding. It's Fight for Life, which has been around for a long time. So we have to fight. That's how we support the event. So there wasn't any.
What about mud wrestling? Mud wrestling?
Mud wrestling, I'm not sure about the mud wrestling. I'll leave that to Nashi. I think they probably do a fair bit of mud wrestling up there in the Labor cabinet anyway.
You could take donations. You could take donations and sponsorship not to fight.
Look,
people could pay.
If they want to do that, then I'd welcome that, because at the end of the day, it's about raising money, especially for. And I am surprised. I've been a minister. That's not an excuse. Ministers have got a big workload, just like MPs have. But if you're determined and you're committed to supporting a cause or a charity, then you just get on and do it, and you find the time. So I just don't accept that at all.
You've been talking a big game. You think you'd win? You've said earlier in the day.
Of course, I'm going to back myself. But Stu, he's very strong. You saw that very famous Facebook video a few years ago where he was in the gym there lifting the heaviest weights. He's got the Hollywood good looks. He can probably dance like a butterfly. I'm not sure whether he can sting like a bee. But look, it was for charity. It was meant to be good fun.
So why do you think you would win? You've just listed all his credentials. What would make you a winner?
Well, I have to back myself, Lisa. I have to say that I can dance like a butterfly as well.
Maybe you could just dance like a butterfly in a match off of Twister. All for a good cause.
It's actually, in all seriousness, it's a really important cause, and I can tell you that unfortunately, as a country, we already struggle under the burden of massive. The police, with my portfolio and Stuart's as well, has had a 60% increase in mental health call-outs in the last 12 months. I mean, that is enormous. And sadly, with what we've faced as a country and are currently facing, that demand is not going to go away. And Mike King does incredible work. Everyone that's seen him do radio interviews recently would see the pressure that's on him. And this is something that we could have done to stand up and actually help and support. That definitely would have attracted more attention. It would have provided Stu with a platform to be able to talk about his electorate and talk about put them at the forefront of people's minds and actually raise some money to help them. So disappointing, but hey, it is what it is.
Really appreciate your time, Mark. That is Mark Mitchell, National MP there, who was keen to raise some money for Hawke's Bay. But maybe you could send in some suggestions what he could do rather than a boxing match with Stuart Nash to achieve that goal. It is 17 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's take a change in direction. A report into the deadly mid-air collision of 2 helicopters on Australia's Gold Coast says the pilot of the helicopter coming into land didn't hear a call over the radio by the pilot taking off. A preliminary report into the deadly mid-air collision has been released. 4 people were killed in the crash in early January. 6 people were seriously injured. Chief Commissioner Angus Mitchell says the helicopters were operating about 200 metres apart, one within SeaWorld and the other on a pad adjacent to the theme park.
The 2 helicopters collided at an altitude of about 130 feet, 23 seconds into the departing helicopter's flight. The helicopters were operating in a non-controlled or Class G airspace, where pilots use a common traffic advisory frequency, or CTAF, to make radio calls to announce their positions and intentions and, where necessary, to arrange separation from other aircraft. The report details the radio calls made by the pilot of the returning helicopter and, as they tracked south over the boardwater, that they saw passengers boarding the second helicopter as it was preparing to depart. The pilot of the returning helicopter recalled that their assessment was that the departing helicopter would pass behind them and that they did not recall the pilot of that helicopter making a standard taxiing call, thereby announcing their intentions to depart.
But the Australian Transport Safety Bureau says it doesn't mean the taxiing call wasn't made. It's yet to determine those details. There were no recording devices on the choppers themselves, and low-altitude radio calls are not always recorded.
The report also details that the pilot of the arriving helicopter did not see the other helicopter actually depart the helipad. While video footage taken by the passengers in both helicopters on mobile phones contained images of the other helicopter, this does not necessarily mean that the other helicopter was visible to both pilots.
One helicopter was destroyed while the other was severely damaged but managed to land. Mr Mitchell says the investigation will consider the operator's procedures and practices for operating scenic flights in the SeaWorld area. A final report is due next year. It's been 1 month since 2 earthquakes destroyed towns in Turkey and Syria. 4 weeks on, more than 50,000 people are confirmed dead, and many families are still combing the rubble for loved ones. At least 1.5 million people are homeless. Anywhere from 150,000 to 200,000 buildings collapsed, and more than 850,000 children remain displaced. The BBC's Anna Foster reports from Antakya in southern Turkey.
These trains haven't left the station for a month. They're homes instead now to earthquake survivors. Yilmaz and 5 of his family live in this carriage. They sleep on the seats, the few possessions they have around them.
They wanted to provide tents to us, but I refused.
AFAD, the Turkish disaster management agency, says around 2 million people have left the quake zone altogether. 1.5 million more are still here and struggling. There's anger too that so many buildings were allowed to have design features that struggle to withstand an earthquake. More than 160,000 either collapsed or were badly damaged, and it wasn't just the old ones.
This is a well-to-do area, it's close to the park, and there are lots of modern buildings. All of them should have stayed up, but look, this one is so new that you can still see the stickers in the glass on the top floor. Nobody had even moved in there yet, and yet it is still toppled to the ground.
The scale of the task ahead is enormous. There isn't enough mechanical equipment in the country to clear the rubble quickly. So places like Iskenderun's collapsed hospital wing stay as they are. Personal medical notes litter the ruins. There are smashed pieces of equipment and medicines lying on the floor. It's a moment frozen in time. People across southern Turkey simply don't know how long they'll be living like this for. Some, like Muzayan, want to stay as close to home as they can. She's sleeping in a tent right outside her damaged house.
My valuable articles are in there. Thieves are roaming around. The police are barely keeping them away. Lots of thieves. How can I live here?
Sprawling tented camps are the new towns. Big promises have been made for a programme of permanent rebuilding, but it won't happen quickly.
Are the new rules on gene editing introduced by China strict enough to stop irreversible damage to human life? A number of scientists, along with legal and ethical experts, are worried they're not. The BBC's Palab Ghosh has more.
Gene editing enables researchers to make precise alterations to a person's DNA at an early embryonic stage, but it's not yet been proven to be safe to use in practice. There was an outcry at claims 5 years ago by Chinese scientists that he'd created children that had been genetically altered to be resistant to HIV. Dr. He Jiankyu was imprisoned for 3 years. Chinese authorities have recently introduced stricter rules for the use of the technology, setting out requirements for ethical approval, supervision and inspections. But Dr. Joy Zhang, an expert on controls on gene technology in China, told delegates at the gene editing meeting in London that she was concerned that Dr. He was able to set up clinical research on another inherited disorder a year after his release from prison.
We could actually be looking at a quite simple case of regulatory negligence. Who is keeping an eye on him and what kind of approval he has and he needs to seek? Any talk of accountable research or good governance in China would be hypocritical.
A spokesperson for the Chinese Academy of Science told the conference that the country had accelerated the introduction of new laws on gene editing, and they were in accordance with international standards. But other scientists at the meeting backed the view that China's regulation of gene editing may still fall short, particularly when it comes to keeping an eye on private companies. Others, though, say it's not an issue only for the Chinese, and Western nations too need to keep a close eye on how bioscience firms forge ahead with this exciting but controversial technology.
A team of Melbourne researchers has equipped school children with air monitors to help track air pollution. The monitors sit inside the students' backpacks and track the pollution they're exposed to on their morning commutes. Researchers hope the data will inform policies to help reduce children's exposure to harmful chemicals. The ABC's Oliver Gordon reports.
Every time primary school student Andy Chisholm walks to school, she'll be contributing to research.
I'm excited about looking through the data and being involved in the project.
She's one of 300 students who'll carry an air monitoring system in her backpack.
We're learning a lot about it, so it helps us.
Andy's mum, Rebecca Gosling, is happy to see a project measuring pollutants in the highly industrialised inner west of Melbourne.
It's always been a concern to parents in the inner west of how much exposure there is here and the quality of the air here. But this sort of project becomes very important then to be able to analyse the data of what our children are being exposed to and to be able to find solutions on a personal level.
So how can you monitor air pollution from inside a backpack? Dr. Kate Lysett from Deakin University's School of Psychology is the lead researcher on the project.
They have a little fan and air sensor in there, so what they're able to do is measure different pollutants in the air, and then we're able to record that data, look at it all and create heat maps and kind of identify where hotspots are and really understand what children in the community are being exposed to on a day-to-day basis.
The project, called Breathe Melbourne, has been inspired by a similar initiative undertaken in the UK. Dr. Kate Lysett says participants in that project have begun making changes to their lives.
So we know, parents who took part in the Breathe London project reported that, they started running on back streets instead of main streets. Another very simple behaviour change was in your car. Often we have our air conditioner set so it brings in the air from outside. So, even just setting that so the air's circulating in your car at times when you're in those busy streets is really helpful.
It's anticipated a large part of the pollution picked up will be from vehicles. That's no surprise to air pollution researcher Claire Walter, a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland. She was recently part of a team of researchers that suggested Australia's yearly death toll from vehicular pollution could be 10 times higher than the road toll. She hopes the Breathe Melbourne project, to which she's an advisor, builds up the data needed to change the way policymakers consider air pollution.
We're basing policy decisions on an outdated set of figures and then the related economics. I mean, one of the things I really sort of look at as well are mitigation strategies that have been used in other places around the world. So there are some places where they have low emission zones, green barriers outside schools that are built on main roads, anti-idling legislation. America's in the process of electrifying all their school buses. All of these decisions are policy decisions, but they're based on cost-benefit analyses. How much does it cost to implement that decision, and what are we avoiding in terms of health expenditure and improved productivity? But if we're using figures that, are tenfold less than the reality, then those policy decisions that we need to protect health and improve our economy are not going to happen, or they're not going to be made based on the best set of evidence.
She hopes the conversation about air quality continues so people can make more informed decisions about the air they breathe.
There's all sorts of behavioural changes that can reduce children's exposure to air pollution if their parents are aware of it.
All right, let's get to some of your feedback before we go. You've got a lot to say about a potential boxing match between Mark Mitchell and Stuart Nash. Well, it's not going to happen because Mark Mitchell has extended the invitation. Stuart Nash says no thanks, and you're lucky that I'm not taking it up. This was to raise money for mental health services in Hawke's Bay cyclone hit. Really mixed bag of opinions here. Mike says, seeing as though they are both politicians, could they not just do a talkathon without actually saying anything? Another person says, I'd be more interested in a game of chess. That would really show the character and power of each man's mind. I'd watch that, says Frank. Frank's from Upper Hutt. And this one in saying a boxing match for charity, grow up. That's Brian from Ngāmotu. And this one, concussions for mental health. We are a moronic species. Well, that is a whole entire other show that we do not have time for this evening. But the Late News team will keep you up to date with anything that's going on tonight. If you missed anything from the program that you want to catch up on, you can find Checkpoint, Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First Up speaks to Coromandel businesses fearing for the future as another major route faces possible closure. That's State Highway 25 with a massive pothole. And that's an understatement that just seems to be getting bigger. They will see you at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Do tune in. We'll see you a bit later.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The driver of a school bus died at the scene of a crash in Rangatike district this afternoon. It happened at Makirikiri Road at Turakina near Martin just before 3 o'clock. 6 passengers had minor to moderate injuries. Thames Coromandel Civil Defence says it's hoping for the best when fixing the region's main highway. A major slip is eating into State Highway 25 between Whangamata and Hikawai. The road is now closed and will be assessed tomorrow morning. The Hutt City Council says it's satisfied with Wellington Water's assurances that supply is safe to drink. Hundreds of Epuni and Fairfield households are getting water that doesn't meet national standards. And a man has been arrested and charged after allegedly disarming an aircraft door mid-flight and attempting to stab a flight attendant in the US. 33-year-old Francisco Severo Torres sparked panic on a flight from LA to Boston. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
After 1 p.m. on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan, menopause has a PR problem. 20 years ago, headlines about a link between hormone replacement therapy and stroke and cancer scared women into halting treatment. But that was never the whole story, says New York Times journalist Susan Dominus. When she started experiencing symptoms herself, she looked at the